Hello, I'm Jonasz Rewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Russia wants strategic autonomy, Beijing wants strategic leverage, and rare earths are where those two ambitions collide, quietly, bureaucratically, and with consequences that will outlast whatever talking point Moscow rolls out this week. When your entire tech stack runs on materials you don't control, can you really talk about sovereignty? So today's story is about a country that talks multipolarity while shopping in a one-supplier mall. Moscow is trying to build a domestic rare earth industry, but the supply chain already has an owner, and that owner is not in a charitable mood. Without further ado, let's take a look at the Russia-China relationship through the lens of rare earth minerals. Here is our report.
When Washington and Kyiv floated a minerals for aid deal in May 2025, Moscow responded with a simple reminder: Russia's rare earth reserves are far larger than Ukraine's. By December, echoes of that logic appeared in proposals attributed to Donald Trump, reportedly envisioning American investment in Russia's energy and rare earth sectors as part of a peace framework. Now, with at least some European leaders signaling openness to renewed diplomacy with Vladimir Putin, the Kremlin appears ready to test a familiar pressure point: resources. At the center of this strategy is the planned $9.2 billion Angara-Yenisei rare earth processing hub in Siberia. Overseen by the Secretary of Russia's Security Council, Sergei Shoigu, the hub aims to raise Russia's share of global rare earth supply from 1.3% to 10% by 2030. Russian Industrial Policy Chief and First Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov chairs its board, and Moscow has already promised tax breaks and infrastructure support. The timing of the initiative is also no accident. Europe remains heavily dependent on China for rare earth minerals, with Beijing controlling the majority of its mining and nearly all refining capacity. In addition, China's use of export licensing regulations clearly demonstrated how quickly supply chains can tighten. EU imports rose sharply between 2019 and 2022, then fell when Chinese controls expanded. Russia, however, sees an opportunity in that vulnerability. If Europe wants diversification, Moscow is offering itself as that alternative. Yet the project also faces obstacles as sanctions limit Russia's access to Western technology. Chinese partners have also appeared cautious, and European companies are unlikely to invest without political guarantees. For the Kremlin, however, even partial success would serve a purpose: embedding resource leverage into future diplomacy and reinforcing the economic foundations of the state.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. Russia is discovering a basic truth of industrial geopolitics. Slogans do not mine materials or minerals. Rare earth elements sit at the bottom of modern technology stacks: magnets for electric motors, guidance systems, semiconductors, renewable energy hardware, and control over both their extraction and processing is control over industrial tempo. Moscow's leadership says it wants technological sovereignty. The problem is that this requires good supply chains. For years, Russia allowed its rare earth sector to atrophy while outsourcing the hard parts of the value chain to China's processing ecosystem. Now that sanctions, pressure, decoupling dynamics, and industrial policy everywhere have made rare earth strategic, Moscow wants to sprint into a marathon that was already won. Rare earths are not scarce in geological terms. They are scarce in usable, processed, separated and integrated form. Mining is the easy part. Separation chemistry is the choke point. Beijing dominates these links because they invested for decades in dirty, capital-intensive processing and in downstream manufacturing ecosystems. Russia, by contrast, is trying to compress that learning curve into a few budget cycles while fighting a sanctions regime that restricts access to equipment, reagents and know-how. Subsidies can make domestic producers price competitive on paper, but they cannot conjure process maturity, waste management capacity or skilled labor overnight. There is also a political economy problem Moscow prefers not to discuss. State corporations excel at mobilizing capital and building showcase facilities. They are less good at iterating quickly in high-variance process industries. Rare earth processing is a game of incremental improvements, impurity control, and discipline. Every percentage point of recovery matters, and every contamination event sets timelines back months. Beijing's incumbency advantage is operational more than ideological here. And then, of course, there is diplomacy. Moscow's public line avoids criticizing China's monopoly because the partnership narrative demands it. In practice, Beijing treats rare earth technology as a strategic asset, protected by export controls and regulatory friction. Russian officials have hinted at negotiations and technology access. Beijing's response, however, has been legal walls, the size of which only China has been known to build. This is not personal, it is simply pro-Beijing policy done right. Rare earths underpin national security supply chains. No serious state transfers the crown jewels of its industrial advantage to a partner that might later become a competitor, a sanctioned market, or a political liability. The result is a strategic asymmetry that Moscow is only now admitting to itself. The strategic lesson here is unflattering, for Moscow, that is. Russia's multipolar rhetoric collides with a unipolar supply chain reality in rare earths. Beijing does not need to threaten Moscow, it only needs to maintain its status. Until Moscow internalizes that, its rare earth strategy will remain what it is today, an overdue admission that Beijing sets the tempo, and Russia is playing catch-up in someone else's supply chain. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Marcin Grabowski, Director at the Center for International Studies and Development of the Jagiellonian University. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good afternoon or good evening.
So first,
good to see you and thanks for your invitation.
Good to see you as well. First, let's talk about Russia's quest for rare earths. Why is it even there? What does Russia want to achieve? Because it seems to have two objectives. One pertaining to China and the other pertaining to Europe.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Russia has large reserves of the rare earth elements, and at the same time, this potential is vastly unused. Therefore, in this geopolitical conundrum we are now, it is important for Russia to get the leverage over basically both Europe and China. China, of course, controls the market with producing around 60%, but refining almost 90% of rare earth elements, while Russia around 2%. So it aims at getting to around 10% through 2030, which is quite difficult goal, I would say. However, for Russia, it is important first to be independent from China. China has a huge leverage over Russia nowadays. Used especially in Central Asia, that's visible also in the rare earth elements markets, and production within Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan. I may refer to this issue later. And at the same time, Russia is able to offer a deal to especially the United States. Trump, this was visible in late 2025, where those deals were offered to American president to surpass American-Ukrainian deal, and therefore get a better position in negotiating with the United States. Of course, European countries are also interested in dealing with Russia. That was visible again last year with those declarations, attempts of Giorgia Meloni or Emmanuel Macron. But if we look at the, I think, largest REE processing plant in Europe, it's in Estonia, Narva. It's supplied in 88%, I guess, still by Russia. So all this is important. Hence, you're absolutely right. In terms of China, Russia could become more independent from China, more equal partner. It's losing its competitive edge. at the same time more attractive partner to the United States and to Western European countries.
So now the crucial question is this. Are European countries, and possibly also the United States, likely to walk into a massive trap that also has been sort of telegraphed by what we've seen before? I mean, dependence on Russian resources, oil and gas, we've already been through it. We've managed to shake it off. Do you think that history will really be repeating itself once again? Of course, Russia knows that we are starved for rare earth elements, and they know about the tension between the US and China. So they are trying essentially to drive a wedge here. Do you think they will succeed?
I'm afraid that may happen. And again, the US started to diversify its suppliers more. Of course, America has its own reserves, has technological potential to process them, but still highly dependent on China. And this dependence has been growing, or maybe has been visible, that's a better expression, after 2023 Chinese restrictions on rare elements. Experts or a temporary ban for 5 of them last year. Hence, it is producing from its own reserves, collaborating with South America. Chile is a good partner here. Collaborating with Australia. Australia has huge reserves. So, in case of the United States, we can observe diversification from dependence on China. Hence, this is relatively rational politics. In terms of Europe, of course, we can say, yeah, it's similar. We do have dependence on China. Hence, we want to diversify from China. But at the same time, the Europe seems not to have a proper global strategy here. And for them, this duopoly still may be better than Chinese monopoly. Therefore, it may step into the trap, as you call it, whenever the war is over, the sanctions are over. The collaboration with Russia is likely.
Let's talk about numbers here, because Russia seems to be making this massive sales pitch to the world, to Europe, the United States. Now, when you look at the official data for rare earth minerals around the globe, immediately you're going to see, like, China at the very top, 44 million tons. Looking for Russia, much further down. Normally, the reserves are given at 3.8 million, which is still considerable. However, the Russian officials recently started to give a totally different number, namely, let me just take a look at the 28.7, which is between 7 and 8 times more than the existing estimates. How is it possible that before that we thought it's about 4 million tons, maybe a bit less? Right now it's closer to 30. That would have put Russia right behind China in terms of the reserves of all these minerals. I mean, no one would be able to compare. I mean, Brazil maybe with 21.1 or something like that. Is it even credible, this sort of information coming out right now? And to what extent is that even viable, even if they had these reserves? As you said, right now it's like 1% of global production, so they don't really have the capacity. Do you think that this sales pitch is essentially bogus? Do they really have those 28 million tons? Or did they just dream this figure up and then floated it to the world, saying, "Oh, look what massive opportunities, trillions of dollars in possible trade and industrial exchange"? Is it really true?
That's a question I cannot answer because I don't want to. It's not I trust Russia, but if I would guess, it's really guess. I would say that it is likely Russia has such massive rare earth elements reserves. Technically, Russia has, of course, the whole Mendeleev chart on its territory. It's the largest territory globally, and I would expect you could find those reserves there. The question is whether Russia can reach to them. And again, I presume that what was in the communique, what is in the information, when we read about 28.5, making it the second largest global reserves, as you've mentioned, may be a propaganda of Russia. But at the same time, I presume Russia can have such reserves. Simply the access to them in certain parts of its territory would be extremely difficult. And Russia, of course, started its massive projects. That's the Mendeleev Valley project or Angara Yeniseian project run by Ksenia Shoigu. I guess he has a daughter of the former defense minister.
Yeah, Mr. Shoigu there, I mean, this shows that, you know, it's just, if you're a part of this regime, you never truly disappear unless you do something against Vladimir Putin himself, in which case you do. But also, I mean, the possible scope for corruption, stuff like that, quite massive. Nevertheless, it also seems to indicate they're quite serious about it, right? They want to keep their hand on these rare earth minerals. But what you're saying is they are starting these big projects. But how much of that could truly bring them results, especially if they don't have access to Western technologies?
Yeah, Russia was trying to get Chinese technologies, as you probably know. Denis Matrev was doing his talks with Chinese counterparts, but China is very strict about not exporting its refining separation technologies for rare earth elements.
Not surprising, is it? Well, they don't want a major competitor. They don't want to help Russia become independent and compete with them on the same market, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's truth. This is one of the reasons Russia so eagerly accepts or even goes with proposals to Donald Trump, as he may be more mercantile. I would say, like the short-term business profits may be justifying certain long-term investments. I hope it won't work. So far, we don't see it would work. The initial communiques say that certain plans have been built for like 2 years now, to be completed 2027. And the major part of the project is to be completed within next 4 years, 2030, when Russia is to export 10% of global rare earth element supply. I have serious doubts whether it's possible, especially technology needed is pretty sophisticated. However, the resources invested, we read about more than $9 billion invested there. There are companies in terms of extraction that are very good. Of course, they in certain elements they rely on Western technologies, both in terms of gas, oil production, but also other mining. But in terms of rare earth elements extraction, I can imagine Russia could do a lot by itself. Refining technology would be much more difficult. So it may provide raw materials, if I can say so, in terms of rare earth elements, which in this case is very difficult. Yes, you would have massive amounts of this, and not the final product. Probably.
So plenty of work to be done, even though this is yet another warning sign for the West. If Russia ever got access to all these reserves, that would make the discrepancy in favor of BRICS countries when it comes to rare earths even more marked than it is already. So a major challenge there. Marcin Grabowski was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you. That was a pleasure to see you. Thank you.
And now we move on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. The Financial Times reported on Friday that a network of nearly 50 companies has been exporting sanctioned Russian oil while concealing its origins. Traders linked to Azerbaijan are said to play a central role.
The newspaper identified 48 firms operating from different addresses but apparently working in coordination as part of Russia's so-called shadow fleet. Investigators linked the companies through a private email server shared, according to the report, between 442 web domains. The Financial Times matched those domains to firms listed in Russian and Indian customs records as shippers of Russian crude. One example is a Dubai-based company that reportedly exported $5.6 billion worth of Russian oil. In total, the network is said to have shipped more than $90 billion in Russian crude, though the true figure may be higher.
Employment among Ukrainian women in Austria has risen sharply since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, according to a new study by the Austrian Integration Fund. Between 2022 and 2026, that figure climbed from 10 to 48%.
Male employment among Ukrainians stands at 51%, suggesting near parity in workforce participation. However, unemployment remains high. In 2025, 19% of Ukrainians in Austria were unemployed, compared to 7% of Austrian nationals. Language skills appear to play a key role. 30% of surveyed Ukrainians rate their German as advanced, while 38% describe it as basic. As of January 1st, more than 94,000 Ukrainian citizens were living in Austria. Women account for 61% of that population, reflecting restrictions on men of military age leaving Ukraine. Approximately half of all Ukrainians in Austria live in the capital, Vienna.
On Friday, Vladimir Putin signed a law granting Russia's Federal Security Service new authority to shut down or restrict internet access nationwide. The measure further expands the Kremlin's control over online communications.
The legislation allows the FSB to require internet and mobile providers to suspend services in cases defined by presidential decree. Putin can now order shutdowns in specific regions or across the country without publicly stating a reason. The move comes as Russian authorities seek new ways to counter Ukrainian drone attacks, which often rely on Russian data networks for navigation. At the same time, regulators have intensified pressure on major messaging platforms. Roskomnadzor, the federal executive agency tasked with controlling Russia's media, accused social media app Telegram of facilitating illegal data markets. Analysts have also noted, however, that Telegram is also used by those closely following the Russian army's movements on the Ukrainian front line.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news, updates and commentary.